getting rediscovered all over again. So here was the second condition for which I think accomplished some serious play. There's a Paul Newman movie that I love called The Verdict. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but it's a beaut. And in the movie, he plays a down-and-out lawyer who's become an ambulance chaser. And he's given actually a malpractice suit to handle that's sort of an easy deal. And in the midst of trying to connect the deal, he starts to empathize and identify with his client, and he regains his morality and purpose, and he goes on to win the case. And in the depth of despair, in the midst of the movie, when it looks like he can't pull this thing off, and he needs this case, he needs to win this case so badly, there's a shot of Paul Newman alone in his office saying, "This is the case, there are no other cases. This is the case, there are no other cases." And in that moment of desire and focus, he can win. And that is a wonderful position to be in to create some serious play. And I had that moment in 1994 when I met a theater director named George Wolfe, who was going to have me design an identity for the New York Shakespeare Festival, then known and then became the Public Theater. And I began getting immersed in this project in a way I never was before. This is what theater advertising looked like at that time. This is what was in the newspapers and in the New York Times. So this is sort of a comment on the time. And the Public Theater actually had much better advertising than this. They had no logo and no identity, but they had these very iconic posters painted by Paul Davis. And George Wolfe had taken over from another director, and he wanted to change the theater. And he wanted to make it urban and loud and a place that was inclusive. So drawing on my love of typography, I immersed myself into this project. And what was different about it was the totality of it, was that I really became the voice, the visual voice of a place in a way I had never done before, where every aspect, the smallest ad, the ticket, whatever it was designed by me. There was no format, there was no in-house department that these things were pushed to. I literally, for 3 years, made everything, every scrap of paper, everything online that this theater did. And it was the only job, even though I was doing other jobs. I lived and breathed it in a way I haven't with a client since. It enabled me to really express myself and grow. And I think that you know when you're going to be given this position, and it's rare, but when you get it and you have this opportunity, it's the moment of serious play. I did these things, and I still do them. I still work for the Public Theater. I'm on their board, and I still am involved with it. The high point of the Public Theater, I think, was in 1996, 2 years after I designed it, which was the Bring in the Noise, Bring in the Funk campaign that was all over New York. But something happened to it, and what happened to it was it became very popular. And that is a kiss of death for something serious because it makes it solemn. And what happened was that New York City, to a degree, ate my identity because people began to copy it. Here's an ad in the New York Times somebody did for a play called Mind Games. Then Chicago came out, used similar graphics, and the Public Theater's identity was just totally eaten and taken away, which meant I had to change it. So I changed it so that every season was different. And I continued to do these posters, but they never had the seriousness of the first identity because they were too individual and they didn't have that heft of everything being the same thing. Now, and I think since the Public Theater, I must have done more than a dozen cultural identities for major institutions. And I don't think I ever grasped that seriousness again. I do them for very big, important institutions in New York City. The institutions are solemn. And so is the design. They're better crafted than the Public Theater was, and they spend more money on them, but I think that that moment comes and goes. The best way to accomplish serious design, which I think we all have the opportunity to do, is to be totally and completely unqualified for the job. That doesn't happen very often, but it happened to me in the year 2000 when, for some reason or another, a whole pile of different architects started to ask me to design the insides of theaters with them, where I would take environmental graphics and work them into buildings. I'd never done this kind of work before. I didn't know how to read an architectural plan. I didn't know what they were talking about, and I really couldn't handle the fact that a single job, would go on for 4 years, because I was used to immediacy of graphic design, and that kind of attention to detail is really bad for somebody like me with ADD. So it was a rough go. But I fell in love with this process of actually integrating graphics into architecture because I didn't know what I was doing. I said, why can't the signage be on the floor? New Yorkers look at their feet. And then I found that actors and actresses actually take their cues from the floor, so it turned out that these sorts of sign systems began to make sense. They integrated with the building in really peculiar ways. They ran around corners, they went up sides of buildings, and they melded into the architecture. This is Symphony Space on 90th Street and Broadway, and the type is interwoven into the stainless steel and backlit with fiber optics. And the architect, Jim Polchek, essentially gave me a canvas to play typography out on. And it was serious play. This is the Children's Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, made out of completely inexpensive materials. Extruded typography that's backlit with neon. Things I never did before, built before, just thought they'd be kind of fun to do. Donors' walls made out of lucite. And then inexpensive signage. I think my favorite of these was this little job in Newark, New Jersey. It's a performing arts school. This is the building that they had no money, and they had to recast it. And they said, if we give you $100,000, what can you do with it? And I did a little Photoshop job on it, and I said, well, I think we can paint it. And we did. And it was play. And there's the building. Everything was painted, typography all over the whole damn thing, including the air conditioning ducts. I hired guys who paint flats fixed on the sides of garages to do the painting on the building, and they loved it. They got into it. They took the job incredibly seriously. They used to climb up in the building and call me and tell me that they had to correct my typography, that my spacing was wrong, and they moved it, and they did wonderful things with it. They were pretty serious, too. That was quite wonderful. By the time I did Bloomberg's headquarters, my work had begun to become accepted. People wanted it in big, expensive places, and that began to make it solemn. Bloomberg was all about numbers, and we did big numbers through the space, and the numbers were projected on a spectacular LED that my partner Lisa Strasfeld programmed. But it became the end of the seriousness of the play. It had started to once again become solemn. This is